So that lets me know where I will start.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone, and greetings from Berlin. Bienvenue à toutes et à tous und herzlich willkommen aus Berlin. For those of you who speak German, I'll have to stop there because we can't do all of the languages that we've got gathered here today. My name is Karen Helmstedt, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this EU Civil Protection think tank. And this is, of course, a very exciting occasion, as everyone who's gathered here knows, because this is the very first think tank to happen within the EU Civil Protection community. And as such, it's really a unique chance to bring together different stakeholders from the political, strategic, and operational perspectives. So the purpose of today is to create a space for new ideas, to do some thinking outside of the box, as it were, and to compare notes on developments, especially considering the explosion of digital technologies that will affect really every aspect of the sector. And of course, not to mention that will drive the need for new expertise, be it digital, environmental, or organizational, or technical, and what have you. In addition, of course, what we'd like to establish here today is we'd like to create a link between the decision makers and the operational staff so that they can better understand each other's needs when the chips are down. And of course, ideally take the next steps into the future together. So to this end, we've invited a very diverse, very international group of experts for what we're hoping will be a stimulating and even visionary discussion to focus on solutions and ideas for how to improve our international response system here in Europe. So this is how we're going to proceed. We have 2 hours, and our structure will be as follows. We have 2 main topics that we formulated into questions. Those have also been circulated on social media. So many of you will have already seen them out there amongst our viewers. And we will spend the first hour with question 1 with the aim of getting input from everyone. And then we will be taking a short break at 1800 hours at 6 p.m. We'll stop for 10 minutes. You can get a fresh cup of tea, stretch your legs, and then we will reconvene and spend the second hour on question 2. Now, a note for our civil protection community and viewers out there, we'd like to very much include you in this conversation. So please feel free to use the YouTube's comments function to enter your questions and comments. And we will, of course, be curating all of your feedback as it comes in and try to include as many of your questions as possible in the discussion. A quick reminder to our speakers just to please use the hand raising function and I will call upon you to speak. 2 hours, of course, do fly by, so my apologies beforehand, just in case I need to interrupt, but I will have to have my eye on the clock as we are, time is of the essence. And now, please, with no further ado, let me introduce our guests. And we're delighted to have 2 speakers from DG ECHO with us this evening. That's the Directorate General for Civil Protection and Humanitarian Aid Operations at the European Commission. Ilka Salmi is Director for Disaster Preparedness and Prevention at DG ECHO, and Hans Das is the Director for Emergency Management and the RESC-EU Reserve. That's also at DG ECHO. So a warm welcome to both of you gentlemen, and we're very, very pleased that you could take the time to join us here this evening. Patricia Gaspar is Secretary of State at the Ministry of Internal Administration in Portugal, and Anne Betens is Head of International Relations at the Directorate General for Civil Protection from the Belgian Ministry of Home Affairs. So some of our member state participants, welcome to both of you. Dr. Mike Ryan has still not taken his seat. I'm hoping that he's going to show up in just a moment. He's the Executive Director of the World Health Organization and has been at the forefront of managing acute risks to global health for nearly 25 years. Let's hope that he is able to join us. Sebastian Rhodes Stampa is currently serving as the Chief of the Emergency Response Section at the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. That's the OCHA or OCHA. In Geneva. Very glad to have you with us, Sebastian. Dr. Raed Arafat is Secretary of State at the Ministry of Internal Affairs in Romania, where he is chief of the Emergency Situations Department. George Karagiannis has joined us, and he is the Deputy Secretary General for Civil Protection in Greece. Sean Hogan hails from Ireland, where he's that country's first National Director for Fire and Emergency Management. And Luigi D'Angelo is head of the Operational Office for Emergency Coordination at the Italian Civil Protection Department, Italian Flag as it's known. And Jean-Marc Bédonnier is Contrôleur Général, or General Director of the Entente Valabre, which is the public entity for the protection of territories and people in France. Dr. Harald Skinnamoon comes from the private sector. He is the founder and CEO of Ansur Technologies. That's a Norwegian company which creates software solutions for rapid response decision-making, and you can guess why we've asked him to be part of this think tank. And last, but of course not least, Björn Stockleben is professor of new media production at the Film University Babelsberg Konrad Wolf. That's just south of Berlin, and his specialty areas are data-driven media production and augmented and virtual reality, among many other things. So thanks very much to all of you for joining us here this evening for this EU Civil Protection think tank. And we'd like to get started, of course, with a statement from the Commission. And for that, I would like to ask Ilkka Salmi to do the honors. He's Director for Disaster Preparedness and Prevention, as I mentioned, but he's also a former director of the Security Intelligence Service in Finland, and so very much an expert on all aspects of internal security strategy. And with that, I will hand over to you. Ilkka Salmi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Karen. Thank you so much for this. And ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, dear friends, it is indeed my honor to have this opportunity to deliver the opening statement in this think tank for the future of the Union Civil Protection. I would like to start by thanking all the participants around this virtual table today. I mean, we have such a vast amount of expertise, knowledge and also experience in the different fields of civil protection. So I'm absolutely convinced that it will be a lively and good discussion. I would like to say a few words of my thinking for the themes for today's discussion and talks, which will certainly be very rich and insightful. I have no doubts about that. So I would like to sketch some general views on the tomorrow of the Union Civil Protection and how I assess how things will evolve. My first point would be and should be that the UCPM in general, but civil protection in general, should have the capacity to adapt rapidly to a changing threat landscape. And we have all seen this over the past 12 months that the landscape can indeed change very quickly. And we have to, while doing that, we have to also take into account the constant evolution of different technological innovations as well. The question might be that how can we ensure that we collectively are better prepared and more resilient in the face of ever-evolving risk landscape? And then again, how can we ensure that we turn the technological development into our advantage? My second point is indeed, in order to do that, we would need to rely on even more, I would say even more and even better scientific advice and strategic foresight. I wouldn't call these as an empty words that sound nice in a panel, but they must be a real must in the era of big data and interconnectivity. The key challenge is how to transform the extraordinary amount of data that is already available into concrete and actionable policies that help us to improve our collective preparedness and our resilience. The third point that I would like to raise, and which I really consider to be essential, is to adopt this how to adopt into this complex environment that we have. I mean, really the cross-sectoral approach is paramount in my view. Crises do not operate in silos, as we very well know, and neither should we. So in that case, I have, and all of us have, a lot of first-hand experience over the years to see that we need to be a very holistic, multi-sector, multi-hazard approach, which will definitely improve our chances to deliver on our common objectives. And it certainly requires more coordination to do that. Commission has already taken some steps in that direction in order to be closer to what I would call tomorrow. Firstly, only some weeks ago, we had reached a political agreement in order to further strengthen the legislation underpinning the Union Civil Protection Mechanism. And this agreement foresees a number of elements that will help us directly to address some of the points that I mentioned. Firstly, we have created the Union Disaster Resilience Goals that will help us to establish a common understanding with member states on prevention and preparedness matters through joint scenario planning. Secondly, we have significantly strengthened our preparedness capacity through a more robust financing of RESC-EU capacities and the new possibilities to directly procure capacities in times of acute emergencies. Thirdly, we have also reinforced the analytical capability of EUCPM, improving the situational awareness component feeding into the operations conducted by the Emergency Response Coordination Center, which will also see its operational link with national authorities reinforced. So indeed, in this new era of the EUCPM, the success story that Modex has represented for the past 10 years needs to continue. And I really look forward for the discussion today and to hear from this very high level panel some of the views and proposals that you have, how we should and could take things forward. Thank you once again for the participation. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Ilkka, Simon. And I think with that, obviously, very good of you to give us your version of your vision of the tomorrow of the EUCPM. And with that, we can dive right into the first framework question, because obviously some limitations are going to be felt by a number of our think tank members. And the first question, which all of you have received, but I will just read it out again, especially also for our viewers. What are the key changes needed to ensure the international response community is adequately prepared to respond effectively to large-scale, new and emerging threats in the future? Of course, keeping in mind that these threats are constantly evolving, as we've seen with the coronavirus. And for that, I would like to address that question first to Hans Das, who oversees the EU operations coordinated by the European Emergency Response Coordination Center, so the ERCC, very much the beating heart of the European response. So Hans Das, if I could give the floor to you to kick off our discussion, and then the rest of you can just start raising your hands.
With great pleasure, Karin. Thank you so much, and good afternoon to all of you. It is such a luxury to have time to actually reflect and think about these issues. So I am very much looking forward to this. Just to break the ice, a couple of thoughts from my side. First of all, let's reflect for a moment about COVID-19. It hit the world unprepared, but it didn't come exactly without prior notice. We knew about pandemics before. In fact, pandemics were included in most of our member states' national risk assessments, and most of us had considered pandemics as a high impact risk, something to take very seriously. Yet all our assumptions about our preparedness for and resilience against pandemics have been proven wrong very early after the virus reached the EU. So why were we not better prepared? As emergency managers, it's not a very comfortable question to address, I fully agree, but it is a question we need to confront, and we need to think about it also in terms of other risks looming at the horizon that can have a very similar scale of disruption. I personally tend to think that the reason why we weren't fully prepared was in the link between what we call foresight or strategic anticipation and operational planning. We knew about pandemics, but we hadn't perhaps spent enough time translating that knowledge about pandemics into operational planning at EU level, at international level. And this is the sort of issues where obviously I would see a role for the Emergency Response Coordination Center in the future. More investment in strategic anticipation and in translating that into planning, into capabilities, into assets also eventually. Secondly, I think we also need to be aware of the limitations of what we can do as disaster response community, and what becomes possible only at political level. COVID-19 is again a good example of that, I think, where we have also shown the best of our abilities, the best of our problem-solving skills within our society. Think about the record time in which vaccines were developed and deployed through a good cooperation between public and private sector research and science, and a lot of political pressure, a lot of political attention for what we were doing. And if we translate that logic into other large-scale disaster risks, I believe that another key change required will be to strengthen the political profile of disaster management and to make sure that strategic anticipation and planning translate into policy and investment decisions that are bold, that are smart, and that are forward-looking, building obviously on the best technology currently available. I am thinking at EU level in particular of the rescue, this strategic safety net that we are developing now. I think we need to turn this development into a political issue where we get attention from the highest levels in our member states and in the EU. And then perhaps COVID will not only be our deepest crisis moment, but also an opportunity to take a giant leap forward in raising political attention to the need to invest at all levels in enhancing preparedness. Final issue I want to link to that is the issue of what some call strategic autonomy. And it is perhaps not the best chosen name, but the COVID crisis has reminded us of how dependent we are on some manufacturers inside the EU or outside the EU. Think of the personal protective equipment and the difficulties we all had to access that in sufficient quantities in the early days. While we have made good progress on PPE in the meantime, there are several other examples that need to be considered. One can wonder, for instance, whether it is a good thing or whether it's normal even that the EU is one of the biggest users of forest firefighting planes, but doesn't have the production capacity inside the Union to actually produce these planes. So I'll just leave that as a question with you. I will stop there, Karen. I'll pause there and happy to come back at a later moment.
Thank you very much, Hans, for that sort of overview of the COVID response. Obviously, a number of things. I think hindsight is 2020, and we'll be smarter for every successive wave. Let's hope. I'm waiting for some hands to go up here because I'd like to see who is going to perhaps contribute next to our question in terms of asking what are the key changes needed. And Anna Betens has put her hand up first. So Anna, I'd like to give the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Karin, and good evening to everyone. I have been looking more or less 20 years ago at the conclusions that were taken after 9/11 during the Belgian presidency of the Union. We organized in Belgium a few workshops to debrief and try to see where the changes would have to come to be prepared to these kind of situations. Now, it is clear that now, like Ilka said as well, we are more and more connected, interconnected. So even if the situation and the disasters are maybe not different, they are bigger, and at least they have bigger consequences. Coming back to that report and to the conclusions at that time, I can see that not much has changed actually as to where are the areas where we have to focus in. The conclusions at that time were cross-sectoral cooperation, all hazard approach, networking, collaboration. These have been mentioned already now. So I think that we have a system that is functioning. We have a mechanism, we have more mechanisms. We can manage But of course, there are areas of improvement. Another element is that I don't think that we need to be prepared for everything. This is not possible. And that's why I'm focusing also on an all-hazard approach. Let's not forget the basic tasks of civil protection. And yes, reinforce those, and let's develop for specific cases like high impact, low probability events, like our colleagues from the Romanian directorate also did during their presidency. But I think we have the keys already for a long time. And cross-sectoral, all-hazard, and networking should be, I think, at all levels, individual levels, at business level, public authorities level, and also international organization level.
Thank you very much to Anna. That's interesting to take a look that far back, obviously, because one would think that we would possibly have made some major changes. I see that Björn Stockleben has raised his hand. So Björn, I'll give the floor to you to make an intervention off of what Anna has said.
Thank you. So I would like to go back to address one point that Ilka mentioned regarding the scenarios, and I would like to give a brief impression of what storytelling can add to the scenario or can do for scenario work. At Film University, we're constantly looking what the skill set we have in filmmaking can do in other sectors, and we are working together with a climate research institutions in Potsdam. We have quite a lot of them there, and one thing we do is, so that two aspects. It's about developing possible but unexpected futures. So we're working with scientists who give us an initial briefing. We work from the facts into an imagined fictitious future, and we check constantly back with the scientists. Is it plausible? Is it not? And so we try to create something which is surprising, unexpected, but possible, rooted in science. So that's one thing. So to get scenarios that are out of the box, and even if they don't happen as that, they can be used as training cases, for example, to improve our flexibility to adapt to different contexts. And the other thing is that storytelling in itself, a screenwriter has a special skill to work with complexity. So if you give an environment, a future context, and people, and you ask him, how would this person behave in this context? He can tell whether it's plausible or not. And the task of a screenwriter is to assume how would a person work in or behave in a certain context. And to relay, and in this way, he can relate from a complex set of data, giving a context to what it could actually mean to actual people with different backgrounds. And so it's quite intuitive, but it can be useful if it is done together with scientists.
Thank you very much. That's a super interesting. That's of course why we invited you to take part in this round. A super interesting look at how some of the smarts of the filmmaking world and the tricks of cinema, and also the imagining of possible future narratives, could help in moving things forward from the communications point of view, but also the storytelling. To know what kinds of scenarios one could expect. I'd like to ask Patricia Gaspar, who's got her hand up, to give perhaps her 2 cents worth on this question of what key changes are needed.
Yes, thank you so much, Karen. Nice to see you all. So I will not say hi individually because there's so many, but it's good to see old faces and old friends together and discussing something that actually is bringing us together for the past 20 years, which is civil protection, saving and protecting lives, and basically working together. So I was thinking about adding at this point some food for thought. We already have a lot of good ideas, good statements which were made before, but I would like to start by saying that yes. So 20 years ago, if you all remember, we were basically focusing almost only exclusively on response. Then we started to talk about prevention, we started to talk about preparedness, but almost always using the same scenarios: forest fires, floods, earthquakes, all the things that we knew that they were going to happen. They happened in the past, they will continue to happen nowadays, and they will continue to happen in the future. However, I think that slowly or not so slowly, new vulnerabilities, scenarios, and new risks are actually emerging in our world, and we need to bring them on board. We need to prepare and to plan for those, like someone said before, and Romanian presidency had these really developed the low probability but high impact scenarios. This is crucial. I think this is really important. Who would say back in 2008 or 9 that volcano eruption in Iceland would paralyze almost the entire EU? Mm-hmm. With commerce, economy, critical services, we were stuck almost for, I don't know, 3 weeks, more or less. So we need to use our imagination, and we need to think really ahead. So we cannot exclude anything at this point. There is definitely a new paradigm when we talk about emergency management, and emergencies are more and more often, I think, related to crisis. And there's a difference between an emergency and a crisis. So we need also to make this distinction. Like Hans Das said, we had we have a big challenge in our hands. We need to adapt civil protection not only nationally, when we speak nationally, but also at EU level. And we need political engagement. We need political involvement. We need to realize that civil protection is just it's not something which it's just sexy to speak about. It's something that needs to be permanently on our agenda, and it's an investment. And sometimes we don't see the results of these investments in 2 or 3 months, or sometimes not even in 2 or 3 years. So we need to be patient, but we need to start as soon as possible. Okay. So we need to bring also on board more technical knowledge, more science, more decision support tools, more prediction systems. And I think that when we speak about technologies, we need to bring this up. Maybe in some cases, we need to shift a bit from boots and hoses, and we need to think about how to respond to different emergencies. Firefighters, boots and hoses will always be necessary, but we need to really think out of the box, because these new crises, these new types of emergency will need much more than that to actually continue to respond. So we need a completely holistic cross-sector approach. Like Anna said, this is not new. We need to involve critical sectors such as cybersecurity. We need to involve economy. We need to involve the health sector, environment. So there's a lot of new things that we need to bring on board. So maybe like we started to speak after COVID about the total reinvention of ourselves. And we also probably need to reinvent a bit civil protection. So if we think that civil protection at EU level aims at supporting member states, we need to think how to do this together in a different way. I'm
going to interrupt you there, yes. just because I want to get to, there's so many other colleagues that have their hands up. And
this was the end.
the overview, fantastic comments, and we'll come back to you in this, obviously, when we talk about the technologies and whatnot. George Karagiannis, I think, has his hand up next. So George, I'd like to give the floor to you. Where are you? Over here in my right-hand corner.
Thank you, Karen. Greetings, friends. Great to see you again. The mechanism is a showcase of what we Europeans can accomplish together and how we can help each other when disaster strikes. And when disasters generate demands that are too much for any member state of the European family, the mechanism is a means that allow us to pull our resources together to respond to these crises. We have already seen that the RescueU medical stockpile works as a charm. And even the transition phase of RescueU, the aerial firefighting fleet, has helped to close quite a few gaps. One can only imagine what RescueU will help to achieve at full capacity. However, as most of you have already said it, uncertainty is the only thing we can hold for certain about what the future holds. Until now, we've known what hazards we would face, and we could even reasonably determine where and possibly even when these could occur. as Ilke said, this is no longer the case. The landscape is changing. And we have seen numerous examples. In the 21st century, we will have to defend against the unknown, the uncertain, the unseen, and the unexpected. We need to develop capabilities to prevent hazards and threats that have not yet fully emerged. Part of that entails not waiting for hazards and threats to emerge. Like Patricia said, we need to strive to anticipate them before they appear. And here lies the critical role of national risk assessments, which the mechanism has taken a leap forward by establishing as a policy instrument. However, another part involves moving towards a capabilities-based approach, one that, in addition to assessing the hazards and threats we face, or we may face, also focuses on how our Europe may be threatened and what capabilities we need to develop to prevent hazards from becoming disasters. Exercises such as Modex and the mechanism simulations are a great way of building and validating these capabilities. Time and again, we've seen the differences exercises make in a community, not because the scenario in which they were based materialized, but because they helped build and sustain capabilities that came in handy in multiple hazards and threats. Last, risk is inherent in all human activities. And in today's interconnected world, the challenge laying ahead is how to build unity of effort across the multiple organizations and levels of government. In other words, when any outcome will likely to be co-produced, how does one balance the need for unity of effort with the need for agility and emergency response? I think those are the formidable challenges that lay ahead, but I'm confident that united as we are around this virtual table, there is nothing we cannot manage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, George. And now I'm going to come over to Luigi D'Angelo, who also has his hands up. Take the floor, Luigi.
Thank you very much, Karin. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure for me to participate to this think tank. And it's the first time after the COVID pandemic spread that we have the possibility to confront with each other. Hans has mentioned the fact that during more than almost 20 years of civil protection mechanism, we have been facing some things that put us under a big crisis. I remember the forest fires 2017. The pandemic is the same. We are all together having a lot of exercises, trainings, plans, meetings. But at a certain point of our life, institutional, professional, but even private life, there's a break. Every country faces by himself the situation. We have our Canada's, we cannot give them to Greece because we need them as well as Greece need them. We have the personal protection tools for pandemia. We cannot give them to Romania because we need them. Romania needs the ones. So as I see it, at a certain point, there is something that doesn't work properly. Why? Of course, because the scale of the disaster. So I think that to face this in the future, we have to think about the flexibility of using tools that have to be prepared by persons that are experts in emergency management. But they are even experts in providing the good tips and addressing properly the political level, which is more and more involved during this large scale of disaster. So I see it as a series of rings that we activate one by one as long as the scale of disaster gets bigger. So we have to really think about that. We cannot have stockpiles for next, hope never be, next pandemia, because we will never have enough storage for million and million of masks. Mm-hmm. But we have to adapt, think and then adapt some tools that have to be activated in case of large-scale disaster. I mean, any kind of tool, political, procurement, resources. So there's a new paradigm. Yes, we have to plan, we have to think about out of the box, we have to think out of the box on what could happen and think about a sort of tools, a set of tools that we have to activate at any level, political and operational. I stop here. I know that.
Thank you very much, Luigi. Yes, I'm going to try to make at least get a tour de table. Raed Arafat, you've got your hand up, and then I'm going to bring in a question from our community. you could just unmute yourself, Dr. Arafat.
Okay, now it's
Thank
fine.
you. Yes, the floor is yours.
Greetings to all my friends, of course. We know a lot of people who are together here. And I will go to two issues. The first is that we are not only the EU alone in the disasters. We have the WHO with us. We have people from other organizations. And I think that the first thing we need to think of is that acting for disaster response and preparedness needs more than just the EU. We need to work, all of us together. So if you ask me how we see things in the next 20 years, I would say with much stronger cooperation between agencies besides the EU and outside the EU, together with those in the EU, like the EUCPM. So we need maybe to update our SOPs. We need to update the list of capabilities. We need to know how we are going to work together. And we need to know that we are not sharing the same resources, that at one moment we are all going to ask for them from different parts of the world. So there needs to be a better coordination for the future. The second thing I will say, and I don't want to repeat what all my colleagues said, when I come back to Rescue, Rescue is a very good example. It's an excellent example on how things can be done for the future, how to prepare for the future. But I think that looking at how we are doing it now, and I'm sure that we will have discussions this with Ilka and with Hans and with other colleagues, we need maybe to be more courageous. We need to create permanent rescue hubs. Now we are working on grants that last for as much as what we purchased lasts, and then it's another grant, somebody else may take it. And what is in fact the predictability and the future of it? So isn't it better to negotiate and to convince different countries to take over part of the rescue capabilities and create permanent hubs for the next 10, 20 years and develop them and help them to become a strong hub? When a disaster happens, we can then use these resources to serve all of us. And they are not the resources of only one country. And I think that this is something we need to start thinking of for the next few years coming on. The joint training and exercises. I think the Modex exercise was a major exercise we did in Romania, which was not foreseen by us. We said we will do it only 3 months before. We didn't prepare a lot of it, but we made it to be really realistic. For 5 days, 4 nights, without interruption, and with a lot of resources involved from different countries that came in and from Romania. And we tested a lot of things that we didn't plan to test. We didn't tell anyone we are going to plan to test. And I think that this way of approaching exercises is very important. If it would not have been for the COVID last year's Modex in Romania was on an epidemic. And it was supposed to involve 3 countries, neighboring countries with an outbreak. To repeat what we did during the presidency on the tabletop exercise, which had an epidemic as an example, and we came out with the conclusion, just and I'm finished, the conclusion that we are completely unprepared. That was the conclusion in 2019. So I think that there is a lot to do for the next years, and we need more to talk about this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Arafat. I'd like to bring in one of our UN colleagues, Sebastian Rhodes-Stampa. You've got your hand up. Perhaps you could comment on what's been said so far.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Karen, and thank you so much, colleagues. And whilst most of the conversation so far has been directed on strengthening of the EUCPM mechanism, clearly from the United Nations point of view, it's perhaps what the mechanism can do outside the Union that is so important. And firstly, I think we can focus on what we're doing well and reinforce success. I mean, the partnership between the European Commission and OCHA is long-standing and continues to involve and support a variety of initiatives that promote the closest possible cooperation between the EUCPM and OCHA. I mean, by way of example, we're currently developing a handbook which functions as a reference tool to reinforce common understanding amongst the many key stakeholders involved in the development and delivery of the International Search and Rescue Advisory Group reclassification process using the EU Modex platform. And I think this really serves as a shining example of the close cooperation we have and the desire to continuously improve the quality of what we jointly deliver. And looking at responses just in the last 12 months outside the Union, there was a particularly strong response to the Beirut explosion. Just in the last 48, 72 hours, we dispatched a team to the ammunition dump explosion in Equatorial Guinea that was supported by environmental experts mobilized through the ERCC. So on the international stage, there's a great deal we can do. And I think we will continue discussions with colleagues in Brussels to ensure coordination between our response mechanisms and the Union's civil protection mechanisms are strengthened. And I very much hope to see a time where EUCPTs and response tools are jointly deployed to these global emergencies, from which we can gain valuable lessons to take back home to the Union, and indeed we can act as responsible global citizens. Some of the lessons from the UCPM, which is one of the most mature regional organizations in the world that might be shared with other regional organizations, is critical, and how we support capacity building in some of these countries as well. So I'm taking it outside the Union, and I do apologize, but I do think that the expertise that has been built up serves a far broader base around the globe, and we have a responsibility to ensure that we do that. Thank you so much, Karen.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. And that's interesting because it does connect to a question that has come in over social media from our community. And I'm going to just put this question out there, and then I'm going to come to you, Dr. Ryan, because just sort of to follow on from Sebastian. The question that's come in from the community is, to what extent can civil protection across the EU to neighboring states and beyond be further harmonized and standardized in the future? That's something that you could also perhaps think about. But Mike, I'd like to give you the floor to possibly follow up from what the other colleagues have said, or even treat this question.
No, I won't attempt to answer that question. I think that's for EU colleagues to answer. But thank you for the opportunity to join this. And again, once again, thanks to all colleagues of the European Union for the work you've done to advance this whole agenda over the last number of years. You've been leaders in the world in creating these types of mechanisms and reaching out beyond European borders. So the world needs this mechanism more than it ever has before. With regard to maybe just some of the specific issues, because the question really you asked was, how do we ensure that we're adequately prepared for large-scale new and emerging threats into the future?
That's right.
There were very specific things in your question. And one of the, if we look at that, you don't know what to change unless you know how you did already. And if I look at some of the attributes of the current response, I would say static, inflexible, over-planned, and under-responsive. In a sense, we were focused to a great extent on capacities that were measurable capacities. We counted things. We're not as focused on the resilience and the adaptability and the flexibility of our systems to react and respond and change as a disaster changes. The one, I think, thing that's very interesting about an epidemic is it's not a single point disaster. It continues, it spreads, it grows, it changes, it evolves, it goes away, it comes back, it ebbs and it flows. It's not a static point, it's not a static disaster. And you have to, and you will learn more about it. In earthquakes, we know that a certain value of an earthquake will topple buildings of a certain building code. We have some predictability. In an epidemic, we don't have necessarily that. We don't know what a new pandemic pathogen will do until it emerges. So we're constantly learning to understand the problem, never mind coordinate the response. I think we've had that sort of an approach. In high performance sport, we used to think about the attributes that people had, their strength, their height, how much they could lift. Increasingly in high performance sport, they talk about strength and conditioning, the ability to avoid injury, the ability to continue to perform. And it's not just purely measured by the specific attributes of response capacity or capability. It's not that. It's the ability to do it for a year, for 15 months, for 2 years. It's stamina. It's getting up every day, 7 days a week and doing it. It's not a 6-week post-earthquake response. A pandemic is a year to 2 years, if not 3 years, whenever they occur. Are we ready for that? We're not. So we need to look at the specific challenges. Same with the climate crisis. Climate crisis isn't coming as a crisis that will happen on day 1 and we'll respond, and then we'll do the after action review on day 20 or day 30. We'll be doing the after action review on year 50. So I think we need to start looking at the scale, length, breadth, and evolution of the new threats that we face, and the level of flexibility and integration and adaptability we're going to need. I think I like the word capability rather than capacity, because capacity tends to measure things. Capability tends to measure behavior or the ability to do something as opposed to having the means to do it. Capacity tends to measure the means, not the action. We have worked here in WHO, and we've been lucky, I suppose, in the last couple of years in fully integrating our all hazards approach. We have one program dealing with natural disasters, epidemics, and humanitarian intervention. It's brought a huge number of advantages to the program in terms of our partnerships and who we reach out to. So that ability to integrate all of that. If we look at this current response for COVID, and I think this is maybe where civil protection has a lot of lessons to teach us in the public health community. We've seen very siloed responses: the public health system, the clinical system, and then the societal support system, which has been equally important. It's not just been about public health and surveillance, and it's not just been about saving lives in the ICUs. It's been about feeding people and preventing mental health illness and supporting elderly people who are isolated. Our whole society has required support and civil protection in the true sense of what you mean by civil protection, protecting society. And I think what's been missing in this is not the effort in each of those pillars. There's been tremendous success and bravery and courage and determination. Where they've been failed is in governance, coordination, cohesion, trust, and the ability to move information between those different silos and make sure the society hear what's happening from the public health people, all of that. So a lot of our failings and the things we need to change are not in the pillars themselves. It's in the way in which we engage and interact and coordinate all of this activity in a complex, evolving, and long-term disaster that doesn't go away in a month. I'll leave it at that, because I think it's more than what we need to change. It's not to say we haven't, all of us, tried our best. We have. It's not that we haven't been courageous, and it's not that we haven't had success. But I think if we take this as the ultimate exercise, I think many of you said it, we were not prepared.
That's right.
And this response has only uncovered our weaknesses. It hasn't really taught us. It has taught us maybe how to fix them. We're not even close. We have to move away from seeing this as cost. We have to move towards seeing the investment, the anticipatory financing, what financing allows us to avoid in terms of further losses. We have simply got to move the equation on that away from a cost base for the investments that need to be made in this space. I like that word, having forecast-based financing. Mm-hmm. I'll forecast what's going to happen, finance me to avoid the cost, and then you get a good deal. So we need to get better at forecasting, not only to predict the epidemics as they come, but to raise the funds to avoid the worst impacts of those forecasted crises. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Mike Ryan from the World Health Organization. And I want to get our last few speakers in here for the rest of the hour. Jean-Marc Bedonnier, you've had your hand up for some time, so I'd like to invite you to take the floor.
Thank you. So as a key player in training and implementation of Modex, tabletop exercise and innovation in the field of training, our reflections are linked to what we have seen in Valhalla Training School. At the European level, it's essential to test the European aid with which the teams are really confronted in the field and no longer work on teams and simulated countries. It's important to test the interoperability of our European civil security system. We have now to be more pragmatic, I think. And in this direction, I agree with Dr. Rafat. In order to better prepare European teams for these emerging risks, the improvement of the current system can be approached under two axes. An intra-European axis, in which we can really work with European countries, and an adaptive real team, making it possible to compare, on the one hand, the host nation support test, and on the other hand, the interoperability of European actors with current national systems. We would also make it possible to use the Emergency Coordinator Center as a real European coordination platform by occasionally integrating national frameworks and using the current tools such as the tabletop exercise, Modex, and full-scale exercise. There is also a second axis which corresponds to the activity outside Europe, in which it would be necessary to test the method of team deployment, the information management system between the Emergency Coordination Center, the host country, and the superior country, to create outside of Europe tabletop exercises with foreign civil protection in order to teach them how to use European means and offer the European Union a capacity building catalog on emergency risks. In both cases, it's necessary, I think, to remain an operational and realistic needs in the field, and potentially review the mission of the EUCP team adapted to the new conditions of use.
Okay, thank you very much, Jean-Marc. Obviously, drawing attention to the importance, very much like Dr. Arafat said, of the exercises as a means to keep up that capacity, to keep up the fitness, obviously, that Mike Ryan has referred to, the need for stamina and interoperability between European actors. And I'd like to come over to Harald Skinnemann, who's had his hand up for quite a while. Let's get some words from one of our outside the box thinkers.
Yeah, thank you. I come from a technical side. I feel, of course, we always need to improve. And one of the things we've been focusing on is faster and better means more targeted response, specifically when we need rapid response. And this means we need faster and more accurate situational understanding, as information is the foundation for decision making, and we need that rapidly available. During the COVID period, we have also seen that there's ability to respond with less travel is important. Go on assessment missions might be difficult. Someone told me that we have COVID, but disasters still happen, meaning other disasters like earthquakes and floods and storms. So engaging the affected population better is possible. And we need to be aware of the difference between crowdsourcing tools and social media. For example, one can engage volunteers, and we want to have data that we trust. We have developed and had available for more than a decade an application for the United Nations for volunteers in this case. But now it's also possible to develop web applications that people don't need to install so they can distribute it easily when something happens. It might be important to consider where those data isn't the right place for some of this data as well. So we're hosting at CERN with the United Nations. Finally, obviously, there's a need for better use, always better use of modern technology. Smartphones are incredibly powerful, and they can have more power in the situations here. Geospatial data, geotagged pictures, satellite imagery, satellite communications is important. That's my background. We want to have communication networks that not just usually work, but always work. Also, the use of drones after earthquakes and situations like this, floods, it might be difficult to move around, and they will definitely help provide an overview and situational awareness at a low cost. And AI, computer vision technologies will help understand the data quicker. Finally, increased collaboration and in terms of having open data that all the different entities can access, I think is important as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and Harald, will be coming back to you obviously in the second hour when we talk about the maybe get into a little bit deeper some of those technologies that you've kind of scratched the surface on. I'd like to go to Sean Hogan, who has also had his hand up for a while, and I think I still need to get some words from you before we even think about moving on to a next thematic complex. Sean, take it away.
Thank you, Karen, and good evening, colleagues. Just a point as well that I would like to make, I think, Karen, just looking and listening here, is there is a lot of activity, but I think what we have to keep in mind always is our overall approach, which we would advocate systemic risk management, of which, hazard identification and risk assessment, as we've seen mentioned, the national risk assessments are the first steps. But as an overall approach for balancing between, Anna referred back to the early times 20 years ago when people too much focus on response, but where you need to focus on mitigation measures, many of which are out there and which exist in society. But it's if you need an overview. So that's an overarching overall approach is what so systemic risk management, which is used in many countries, is my advocating on that. And specifically in relation to the question, could I make a small suggestion? And Hans has already mentioned, his emergency response coordination center and how that might be used. But I think that by the daily looking at what's happening in the world and thinking, well, if that happened here, how do we respond to that? You're then making the link between the operations piece and the preparedness piece and all the little pieces. It's a simple technique that we would use every day. Something happens, some part of the world, you say, oh, how would we cope with that? And then you can chase that down a little bit. And my colleague, Mike Ryan, has already spoken about the need for the flexibility. And I think that's, you build capacity to crisis manage rather than getting overly bogged down in the capacity issues, because then you have the flexibility to look and to see and to work and to see what your issues are. And I think we'll come to this in the next questions that are asked in terms of how we deal with it, how we manage the information, which is what Harold was speaking about there. And again, speaking out of that experience as well. So those are the points I would like to contribute, Karen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sean. And Ilka Salmi, I'd like to come back to you because you made the opening statement, but you really haven't had any airtime yet on this particular issue of where the key changes need to happen.
Thank you, Karen. Actually, I thought that I would also try to reply at least briefly to the question that was made from the community as well. So, a few things that popped into my mind. First of all, I would like to use the word harmonize very cautiously here. First of all, the civil protection is in the responsibility of the national authorities, the member states, what have you. Having said that, we do have a support function, of course, on an EU level. And I think we have also in this discussion, we have raised at least 4 points that come to my mind where we can really contribute into the better preparedness and also to the response. Firstly, the national risk assessments mentioned by several of the speakers today, something that we compile in Brussels, and we try to share that information and a common, let's say, understanding what picture is and where we stand. Secondly, we have been talking about Modex exercises. That is indeed a very concrete example where colleagues coming from different member states, participating states, what have you, can practice, train, meet each other, share experience, and what have you. That would also give kind of a wider understanding what makes sense, what are the best practices, what have you. Thirdly, REST EU stockpiling was mentioned. That's something which is, in my view, a great response to some of these activities where we contribute all over the EU and also to the neighboring regions. And then finally, the fourth point that I wish to make is the newly established, but let's say formally launched, still to be formally launched knowledge network, which we will try to connect many of these dots that have been discussed, be it the science or otherwise, so that we could bring some answers to the questions that have been raised and also to the challenges. So I also would like to underline that this is where we can contribute. But from the operational point of view, of course, the first line responders that we have in the member states are the ones who kind of set and form and shape the way they are doing it, and we try to assist and support. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the responses from all of our speakers. I think it is definitely time for us to go into our break. So I'll just sum up. We've had a number of words, obviously, and keywords and concepts and thoughts come up through this first hour. Obviously, the cross-sectoral approach and the idea of collaboration needing to be strengthened, even though that was something that was concluded many years ago after times like 9/11, if one looks at those approaches. COVID also having been a great test scenario to really indicate that there are a number of types of scenarios for which we are not prepared. And some ideas certainly thrown out by people like Dr. Ryan, perhaps instead of just thinking about response capacity, actually shifting into a more capability type of modus operandi, getting away from siloed responses, and obviously having an interoperability between European actors, but definitely increasing and improving, enhancing the connection between the political levels and the operational levels. So I guess with that, we'll go into our break. We're going to take a break of 10 minutes. We'll look in the next hour, obviously, at some of the technologies that could possibly be implemented to actually make some of these changes that we've identified as being necessary. And during these 10 minutes, just for our viewers as well, during this time, we invite you to take part in our survey. And for that, you will find a link in the chat of YouTube, or you can just use the QR code that will be shown as a screensaver during the break to all of our participants. Please stay with us. Don't tune out just yet. And I'll ask everybody to be back at 18:10 sharp. Go get yourself a cup of tea, and we will proceed with our next question and our next hour after that. See you after the break. Thanks very much. I think I've just been given the signal to carry on, and welcome back, everyone. I hope everyone has had a stretch. Before we resume, I'm not sure I need to introduce a new member. I think we're all still sitting on our chairs. Is everybody back? Yes, absolutely. There's Harald, and I see Dr. Ryan is still with us, so I'm going to just continue, because we've had a very interesting discussion, obviously focused on the many areas that need to be worked on, the abilities and strengths of the UCPM, but also a number of the weaknesses, for instance, with the case of the COVID crisis with which we're still dealing, and of course, obviously the idea that we need to be prepared for we have to take an all hazard approach. It's time now for our second framework question, and we would like to focus a little bit more on solutions. And the second question that we decided to throw onto the table for this second hour was, what kind of technologies are out there, and how can these technologies better facilitate the work of the overall emergency response system to achieve what we've been talking about, these more effective cross-sectoral coordination and cooperation, which are severely lacking in some cases. So I'm not sure who wants to take a first stab at that, but perhaps I could come to Sebastian for your point of view from overseeing the international response system for sudden onset emergencies. I'd like to give the floor to you, if you'd be so kind.
Yeah, delighted. Thanks, Karen. This is not a particular area of my expertise, but I would possibly focus on, I think Harold and others will have a far more interesting and innovative approaches than I. Certainly, we've been leveraging a number of different technologies to support our preparedness training. But I would note that we had a look at a number of different platforms. We use a system called the Virtual On-Site Operations and Coordination Platform, which many of the members are familiar with, to facilitate our coordination outside of the physical disaster. That's worked very well for us for some time, but it's now slightly dated, and we're looking at new options. What I would say is that we're keenly aware of the limitations of technology, in that, for instance, again, for the International Search and Rescue Advisory Group, we actually need to have face-to-face training for classification, reclassification, in order to maintain our high standards. And there are a number of European teams with whom we work, and that's been fairly complicated. I would certainly say that one of the areas we look at, and Harold mentioned it, is crowdsourcing and community engagement. And we're finding, again, the innovation and the tools aren't quite up to it, but the information we do get is invaluable to informing the way in which we plan our interventions and response. But I'd be very interested to hear from some of the folks who have a technical background how this is advancing, because much though we like the platforms, we're finding more limitations with than we are utility at the moment.
Okay, well, on that point of limitations, let's come over to Dr. Harald Skinnemund and see if you can respond and perhaps go a little bit deeper into some of the things that you scratched the surface on in the first hour, and then we'll get some more input from the member states and also go to Mr. Stockleben.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'd like to take you back to where we started. So about a decade ago, we were approached by someone quite familiar with the EU civil protection and the UN disaster management mechanisms, wanting an all-in-one disaster assessment tool. At that time, there were no smartphone applications. You had a separate GPS, a PC, and a camera. And the key thing was to provide those assessment results to decision makers for them to present decisions, to take decisions as quickly as possible. So when smartphones came along, we started developing the first apps for this, and they have been hosted with the United Nations and tested and verified with disaster management and improved iteratively for more than a decade, both with triplex exercises, which are mainly involving, well, it's involving both the EU and UN, and Modex Exercises with UN Civil Protection, EU Civil Protection. We have more than 5,000 users of this application with United Nations, providing information at times of disaster. And this is geospatial intelligence that is integrated with satellite images that are processed by UNOSAT in Geneva. They do rapid mapping, rapid situational understanding from satellites, and then the smartphone application provides ground truthing, ground verification. So together, these two things provide a live situational awareness map that is open to the public, and everyone can see it and use it. And we are augmenting that now with computer vision and automatic detection, automatic analysis. We see drones are quite interesting. Drone imagery can be embedded. 3D images or 360 images can be integrated. But everything is not just for playing with technology, although that's fun, but it's to help gather and communicate that data and understand it as quickly as possible. Finally, I'd like to also focus a little bit on the communications part. We see during disasters, at least historically, mobile networks have been affected severely by some disasters, flooding, earthquakes, etc. During Katrina, I think 90% of the networks were down. So this means you need to also be prepared to operate with low bandwidth and maybe even mobile satellite networks. That can also be quite expensive. So we have specifically focused not just on collection and presentation of data, but also the ability to communicate them with a technology and approach we have developed that saves from 90 to 99% bandwidth, but still leaves you with the relevant information in full precision. And, you know, as a communications engineer, I like to say that if you are doing a tactical response that is critical, you always have a bandwidth problem because you always would like to see what you need to see quicker.
Indeed. Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Skinnamun. And perhaps Björn Stockleben, would you like to take the floor already and talk, for instance, about some of the technologies that you're working on, go a little bit deeper into what you had started to explain, and then we'll get some feedback from the member states as to what they're already perhaps implementing and what they are definitely looking forward to implementing, and then we'll look at how to do that.
Actually, it's also a lot about the actual needs and connecting the dots. So me starting has some advantages and some disadvantages, but I'll try my best. We're currently building AR applications, so augmented reality applications where you have those fancy HoloLens 2 AR headsets, and you watch on basically a map of a disaster situation, and you're seated around a table and are discussing and training using this visualization. And that's kind of where it all started, me becoming involved with this topic. And there is different things these new immersive technologies can bring to the, well, literally table. The augmented reality, so if you have a headset where you can really look through, so it allows you to see data and at the same time connect to your team, connect to others. So it's a tool that improves the sociability in a situation and the empathy. So you're not sitting and watching at a screen and discussing, but you're looking at each other and have the same digital visualization in front of you. What it also brings, what it also can offer you is the third dimension in information visualization, which is or might be a crucial thing to reduce complexity, because we are it is still a high effort to so you have to abstract data, do a lot of data abstraction to render it on a two-dimensional surface. This is always a compromise, and it involves a lot of processing and knowledge and skill in the people involved. And so by involving the third dimension and creating data visualizations which are immersive or, well, spatially distributed, you can focus your attention better to this or that part. You can imagine three-dimensional structures better and so on. That can be an advantage, especially if you're working with people who are, if you're working with non-experts, like politicians, for example. So if you have people who are not used to interpreting data. If we are looking at virtual reality, if I shall still add that.
Maybe I could just stop there, because I thought that was very interesting that you brought in that aspect of actually using it to educate some of the political actors in the whole question, and not simply in a training situation, because obviously my first thought is to implement it on the ground. Patricia Gaspar, you've got your hand up. I'll come back to you, Björn. Thanks very much for those points so far. And Patricia's had her hand up here. So let's hear your thoughts based on what we've heard and these new technologies, how they could be applied.
Yes, thank you so much, Karen. They can be applied, and they are of an enormous value for responders and for emergency managers. I think that we have everything that we need in a general perspective. We have drones, we have rapid mapping, we have applications, we have dashboards. We have a lot of ways to actually bring these technologies into our field. My thing is, and what I would like to bring the attention to, is that all these technologies are important, but they need to come with knowledge. Mm-hmm. So we need to connect knowledge with technology so that we can use them into the two big dimensions that I see, which are of the utmost importance. It's the decision support tool. So we need to bring this information to people who are deciding, but also beforehand. These are the things that can also help us to anticipate, like Hans Das said in the first panel. We need to use not just our imagination to come up with new scenarios, but we need to anticipate things. And if we use correctly these technologies and this knowledge, maybe we can improve a lot in anticipating. And if we anticipate, we can better prepared. We can be better prepared. So the knowledge network, for instance, which is an important tool which is being developed now under the framework of the mechanism, is something that can bring an enormous contribution into this area. So we need to bring everything together to avoid the silos approach, like Mark said, and to see these in a global perspective. And I think I'm not an expert in new technologies, but I use them. So I think that not only as a politician, but I used them before as an emergency manager. And yes, they are of an extreme value, but always together with knowledge and with these two dimensions, decision support and anticipation.
Okay, thank you very much, Patricia. Luigi D'Angelo, you've got your hand up. Please take the floor.
Thank you, Karen. I would say that scientific community and in general technology have been always a big pillar on which the civil protection section has based its own decision in general. And in my professional life, I've always relied upon the contribution of science and scientific community, experts of risk and technologies. I would say that the challenge for the future is based on reinforcing our capacity of early warning system with a multi-hazard approach, including pandemia, of course. And on this, there are a lot of tools, as Patricia said, but a lot of things have to be done. If I think about seismic risk, we are not able now to predict where, when, and how it can hit a territory. And of course, the early warning system gives us the possibility to make some safeguard measures in advance. Very related to this, we have the risk monitoring technologies, which are really valuable. And now a new challenge for the future, which is the geolocated alert. So it means go directly on the mobile of the citizen who is standing in a hazardous or a risk area, really beforehand, so he can receive an alert on his mobile and move and act appropriately. That's really a new challenge for the future that we are already facing in Italy with the new system ET Alert that give us the possibility to geolocate an alert for the simple fact that you are in a risk area, you can receive an alert. Let's think about tsunami on the coastal areas. We have so short notice for the early warning, and then we have to improve our capacity to go directly on the citizen. And of course, then it comes even after about the satellite image and all other tools and drones that are really valuable for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Luigi. And I'd like to come over to Anna Betens. You've got your hand up as well.
Yes, thank you very much. Thanks, Patricia and Luigi, for saying already half of the things that I wanted to say. So I'm not going to go more in detail in that. It's clear that we need new technologies to cope with and to catch up with developments in the different phases, in preparedness phase, in the alert phase, modeling, and I'm sure that Jean-Marc Begnoni will be able to tell us more. Entente is also doing a lot in that area, and in response. The elements that I would like to draw your attention to is, of course, we need the right tools for the job that we need to do with the knowledge. It needs to stay needs driven and not resources driven. Let's also think about, we are talking about managing consequences of climate change and environmental situation. Let's also try to have in mind the environmental friendly elements in developing new technology. And finally, I would like to broaden a little bit more the discussion. I know we are talking today about new technologies, but there is a lot also more in overall research and scientific support that we can have. I recently participated in a conference from the Association of Southeastern Asian Nations on mental health and psychosocial issues in disasters. There as well is, for instance, one of the areas where lots of things have been done. So I would maybe expand the idea of new technologies to new approaches in research and development. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Mike Ryan, perhaps I can bring you in on this question of the new technologies. I can get you to unmute your microphone there. Let's see. There we
Am I
go.
unmuted?
I can hear you. Yes.
Okay, good. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
No, it's fascinating to listen and learning a lot from hearing everybody. Let me, from my perspective, maybe also, we talk about technologies. We often talk about technologies in terms of what we want to make and the development cycle and the developers and what developers want to make. Let's maybe talk a bit more about what the users need in terms of, and the users and beneficiaries of technology and disaster management. And we need to think in this case, in the case of COVID-19 and in the areas we work, like in hemorrhagic fevers and Ebola, the frontline workers and what they've had to endure and experience over this last year, and certainly in the case of a high impact epidemic. We need a complete rethink on things like PPE, not only its availability, but its design, its wearability. PPE is designed for men, not for women. There's a whole load of issues around the innovation and technologies we need. It's not just IT. I think it's horrific to me to see how so many people have died alone in this epidemic in intensive care units without their families. In Ebola, we've solved that. We've brought, working with Alima and MSF, we've brought bubble technologies to the field that allow the person to be in isolation in a bubble and be seen and worked on by health workers in normal gear, by their families sitting by their sides. We've brought that technology to the deepest part of the rainforest, and yet we've had thousands of people dying in agony and without their families. They're the technologies we need. Adaptive technologies that allow our emergency response to remain humane with the rights and well-being of the human being, whether they're dying or not, their welfare. The last hours of your life, the last days of your life are probably the most important days of your life. And we've denied so many people the opportunity to spend that with their families. So I think we need to think maybe about what we mean by innovation. We often get upstream and we're talking about satellite technologies and all that's great. And I'm the greatest lover of IT, but we need to get downstream. We need to put new technologies in the hands of frontline responders, point of care diagnostics, better PPE. We need oxygen. My God, oxygen is a technology we're missing all over the world because we haven't adapted our hospital systems to deliver life-saving oxygen. So I think these are the things we really need to start thinking about. Right now, oxygen and dexamethasone are about your best chance on day 10 in this pandemic. If you start to have an immunologically mediated response, that desaturation we've all heard about when your oxygen drops, if you don't have oxygen on tap and a strong corticosteroid, you're in trouble. So many people in the world have died for the lack of those two simple interventions. So we need to be really careful when we talk about innovation. I do think, and everyone mentioned it, decision support, anticipation, data for planning. We need those systems and we are developing them. But again, it's about the data and the access to it. It's about the tools we use to analyze that data, and it's about the communities who use that data. We need to think about technologies now, data as an ecosystem, no longer as a solution or an app for this and an app for that. What we're missing is a clear understanding of the data we need and where to get it and make it accessible, a clear understanding of the tools that we're going to use to analyze that data and what it's going to tell us, and then a clear focus on giving the different communities of users. So the prime ministers of the G7 are a community of users. They need data presented in a certain way, and a group of super experts in vaccinology who are deciding what a vaccine should do, they need data presented in a different way again. So we need to think about the users of the data and how data should be presented to them. So I think there's a huge area of work to do there. On emergency management, I think the whole area of integrating emergency response, you know a lot more about that than me. We're all developing different technologies. I think we need to do some co-development here. There's a tremendous amount of money going into siloed development of emergency management systems. If we take the view of survival of the fittest, then we're going to get less than perfect systems. I like the approach we've used with the European Union. The Epidemic Intelligence from Open Sources project sought to increase epidemic public health intelligence around the world. It worked with the existing public health intelligence tools, with HealthMap, with GFIN, with ProMed, and the Joint Research Unit of the European Union worked with us to develop a super technology, EIOS, which is built on everyone's experience. So it's a public-private partnership to develop a better tool that anyone has right now. I think we need to look at those collaborative methodologies going forward. Collaboration, not competition, in order to develop the essential innovations and tools for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ryan. And I'd like, basically coming from the medical frontline, thank you for pointing out, obviously, that innovation is many more things other than just IT. It's also organizational. I'd like to come over to Dr. Arafat, who's also one of our resident experts in disaster and emergency medicine. And perhaps you can just follow up, and then we'll go back to some of our other member state colleagues.
I think Dr. Ryan really resumed a lot of the things that we really need to look at. But I would go for two experiences we have in Romania in using modern technology, and that is the use of virtual reality during exercises and training, and having, let's say, major disasters being simulated, those that you cannot really simulate in real life, and having the decision makers to train on how to take decisions and facing them with, let's say, surprise issues and so on. This has shown us that it works very well. Embedding the virtual reality in ground exercises and field exercises and having within them a component of the virtual reality have shown to be very helpful. We used it in our own exercises, in the Modex exercises, but as well in NATO EADRCC exercises. And it worked very well as an experience for us. The second one is the telemedicine. And here I would say that we have been working a lot on telemedicine in emergency services between the pre-hospital, the hospital, the distant areas, the rural areas, and the centers which can coordinate the EMTs on what to do. We ran a study and we published a research, in fact, that we've done under the Science for Peace initiative by NATO. We ran a study on the issue of using telemedicine in remote areas during disasters. And we did some tests during exercises that we ran in Ukraine, and the tests showed that this is a feasible way. But of course, this is just the beginning. We need a lot to talk about these issues. So these are just examples of what to mention on what we are doing. Of course, there must be a lot of place for artificial intelligence and for many other new technology like augmented reality and so on to help us in training and in preparing and in responding to disasters. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Dr. Arafat. Jean-Marc Bedoni, you've got your hand up. I'd like to give you the floor. I think your microphone's working better this time around.
So from my experience, a key innovation is the implementation of a shared operational situation solution going from the field level to the Emergency Response Coordination Center via the national operational centers of all the Cypriot countries. Example, an upgraded version of the virtual OSOC should exist in European format. In the field of research, many European projects have offered tools such as a common operational picture software for more than 15 years. These tools were deployed on a real scale in the field during exercise organized specifically within the framework of these projects in order to test them under operational conditions by European teams. Unfortunately, to date, none of them has been set up at European level despite the work provided by teams of researchers, industry, and operationals. Sometimes we have the feeling that the provided work is not used. It's important to link the results obtained in the research projects with the terms and needs mentioned in the call from DG ECHO. This connection would allow easier deployment of current technologies. Other current technologies can be used to facilitate the treatment of large-case emerging risks. For example, workshops of thematic exercise aimed at achieving a specific objective could use virtual reality and simulators. And adjoint here, again, the Dr. Arafat for the simulation. Moreover, it's important to set up an European-wide thematic data sharing service that would be derived from new satellite image processing, deep learning results, and artificial intelligence. it would also be useful to have access to big data on a European scale. For this, the existence of more centralized system or an European data center, why not include in the European Civil Protection Agency, could be developed. The analysis of this type of data would be a significant added value for each country and should be available in open data, accessible to the public and not chargeable. This action could be part of the knowledge network of the European Commission. Finally, Europe should deploy means of interoperability in each crisis with a specialized team of communication deployment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jean-Marc, for citing sort of those very wide-reaching, obviously EU-wide data sharing and the access to data. Obviously, there's enormous amounts of data that everybody is dealing with, and some of the problems are actually sieving out the proper data or being able to mine exactly what the specific data that is needed at the moment. So data analysis is obviously highly important. George Karagiannis, you've got your hand up. I'd like to give you the floor.
Thank you, Karen. I'd actually like to follow up on what Jean-Marc and you pointed out. I'm sorry, that the challenge lies not in the absence of technology and scientific information, but in how to manage the abundance thereof. On the topic of science and technology in emergency management, I think we're somehow living Zeno's paradox, the one where Achilles is outrun by the turtle. It's recognized that technological information and scientific information and data and science for policy are central to the development and iterative improvement of policies and to the delivery of equitable programs across every area of government, not only emergency management. Closer to home, first responders across Europe benefit from new technologies that become available at an ever-increasing pace. Who would have imagined 10 years ago that first responders would be able to attach cameras and other sensors on remotely operated yet portable rotary wing aircraft, so that they could approach areas where it would be too dangerous for searchers to go look for people who are trapped, right? Nowadays, not only we're using cell phone towers to send alerts to everyone located in a precise area, like Luigi pointed out, but we're even trying to use satellite technologies and existing cell phone technologies to narrow down how we target those we need to alert. So the challenge is how to use that information that is available at the policy level and at the tactical level to improve the operational level, to improve emergency planning and disaster response. For example, can we use machine learning and artificial intelligence to improve information management? Can we use it to improve public safety dispatch? COVID-19 has undoubtedly been the greatest digital transformation driver in many professions, including but not limited to emergency management. For instance, in Greece, we deployed a machine learning algorithm which helped us optimize testing of visitors coming into the country last summer. In that direction, I think the Union Civil Protection Knowledge Network is surely an important step. I believe it can help in two ways. First, it will help us make better use of existing scientific and technological breakthroughs, many of which have been co-funded by the European Union through various instruments for that matter. And second, I think it will help us to identify the areas where future research could benefit civil protection in Europe. So I'm looking forward to seeing what the Civil Protection Knowledge Network will have to offer in the future. Thank you.
So this question has also come in from the community as to what can be the specific role of the EU Knowledge Network to contribute to further development. That's exactly what you're talking about. I'm wondering if I could get Ilkka Salmi to comment on that.
Certainly, thank you so much. I was listening very carefully what George was saying and also Jean-Marc before that. So I mean, and also we have high, let's say, hopes and ambitions and expectations that what we could do with the science, especially with the science pillar in the knowledge network, which And I think the important part where we have to start now is to really understand what is already available. I think many of the colleagues who have, took the floor earlier mentioned that there is already lots of technology available. How can we really connect the dots? And again, how could we make that technology available so that we can also inform the decision makers in a very efficient way, all the way up to the highest political levels? And indeed, this is one of the key goals now. Once we have identified what is available, then we would like to start looking for what would we need to do to fill the gaps. I mean, what are we still missing, and what sort of needs there might be, and especially taking into account the users' views, users being the first responders all the way to the highest political decision making. So it's a very ambitious project, but I think it will be, really beneficial and help also the colleagues around this virtual table today to identify what we have available once we have, let's say, achieved a bit more than we have available today. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Salmi. Professor Björn Stockleben, I think you've put your hand back up. I'd like to bring you back in.
Maybe first about the notion that technology has to be used meaningfully by serving a demand of users. So actually in interaction design, so which is also part of my background, we always think about any process as a communication process. So at the end of the two ends of the process, there are always human beings, and it's about a communication between them that is somehow facilitated, routed, networked, whatever, mediated by a technology. So, and it is first to understand what the nature of the communication and the purpose of the communication is, and then from there you look what are meaningful tools in this process to support this process. And we also like to look at not only the technology, but look at it as creating a socio-technical system. There are, for example, if you talk about big data analysis, of course, for disaster prediction, so you could use vast big data analysis. You just put a lot of data sources and run machine learning to detect anomalies. But what is a relevant anomaly? It's really, you get alerts all over the place. That's difficult. On the other hand, humans are quite well equipped to detect anomalies and meaningful patterns in data if you visualize it accordingly. So there might be times where you use complex data visualizations and humans to judge them better than having computers judge them. Another example is that the embodiment of information is not necessarily best if you do it in the most dimensions available. So like animated virtual reality visualizations, but sometimes it reduces complexity a lot if you just have a human expert there embodying the information, conveying with it information also trust expertise. So, and so I liked what Dr. Arafat said about the training where they integrated virtual reality in a complex training scenario. So really to look where is a meaningful contribution. One contribution of virtual reality can, for example, be the creation of presence, an immediate feeling of being together, although you're not in the same place. That's something virtual reality can add. And you can also visualize certain things you cannot see or cannot visualize in reality, but you really have to think about what parts of the scenario you visualize and what you give by data and what by statements from human actors.
Thank you very much. Jean-Marc Bedouny, you've got a comment to bring in on the end of this.
No, for someone, no. No comment from.
Oh, okay, you had your hand up and you've now taken it away. Okay, so I'm wondering who would actually like to perhaps Harald Skinnaman, you could possibly, after having listened to all of this and sort of seen some of the ideas of limitations of technology, it needs to be brought obviously to where it is needed. What are meaningful contributions? Perhaps you've got some more thoughts based on what you've heard.
Yes, I could mention some one initiative that we have taken with experts in civil protection and EU operations. We're setting up a remote expert advisory group. This is based on COVID-19 limitations, ability to travel, etc. And it's based on the idea to do remote capacity building. So without necessarily going on a plane, you can provide your skills and capacity from anywhere via resilient web tools that could be operated in the field with low bandwidth, as we talked about earlier. And then you would have like a virtual, a human virtual operation center in a way, not necessarily having to go in the field, but complementing those who are already on site. This means you have access to more expertise and quicker access to that expertise as well. So broader applications of skills and more rapid access to it as well. So hopefully that is something that is good that has come out of this COVID time when everyone is on video conferencing. But it's important, you know, that we can develop tools that allow people to contribute. And I don't know how many of you have experienced during the COVID period that someone says, turn off the video because we want to save bandwidth. I think everyone has seen that. So it will be important in our case to develop tools that allow the video conferencing to work with low bandwidth. So these are like technicalities that tools are cool, but they need to work when it's critical.
Indeed, indeed. And obviously the communication systems are anything but optimal in certain parts of the EU. Patricia Gaspar, you've got your hand up. I'd like to bring you back into the discussion.
Yes, Karen, thank you. Just a final comment from my side. I think that we have so much to discuss about this, and we could be here for another 2 days, and even like that, we wouldn't cover everything. So not to lose track and focus of what brought us together here today. I think that honestly, we need to be brave enough and honest enough to be able to actually identify all the lessons learned that we got from all these pandemic emergency, but not only from COVID, also from all the other previous emergencies that we had, and bring this into our preparation program at EU level, and to see how can we fit this and how can this feed the new exercises, the new training program, because otherwise we will never get out of the wheel. So we identify, we know what it is, we know that we have failed here and there, but then we need to move further and we need to build on everything that we have learned so far. I really like just a final comment to pick up on what Mark Ryan just said about technologies, and this is really important. That's why we are here for. If technologies are not there to save lives and to protect people, then they are not of much use. All those who have died alone during this last year, all those families, everything that we have missed and that we lost this year, if we can manage to use technologies, not only to support ourselves, but also to support citizens, then we are fulfilling our mandate, we are fulfilling our mission, and we cannot lose track of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patricia. Sean Hogan, I'm just wondering if I can bring you back in for a comment in this hour before we move towards wrapping up.
Yes, I would like to, in fact, to comment on it. And I was struck, I think it was Anna earlier was speaking about the broader aspects of research, and I'm struck here that there's different worlds perhaps here, and you've brought some of those worlds together, but it's true research and true academic approach where people look at a situation and look at the technologies, can make that sort of accessible to me. I can read that this is the direction that things are going, or we can take the experiences and how we need to support the academic approach to the work that we do here, which can really be a joiner, because having the great technology is wonderful, and we've all progressed enormously in the last 12 months in our use of technology. And it's wonderful to be here finishing in a think tank like this. But I just think that we do need to make sure that we keep the pieces joined. And I think the academic can do that. And I think it was Anna said that earlier on, I think about that. And I just support that point very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sean. I'm just wondering if I could come back to you, Sebastian, because you started off and sort of said we should hear from the technical experts first. But when you talked about taking the UCPM obviously outside and beyond the union, when you think of your vision for the international response system for 10 years of now, what would you sort of crystallize as your top 3 priorities or 2 priorities to leave us with this discussion?
I think moving just look. So thanks very much for the opportunity to have a last word. I mean, I think that for technology, I think what everybody has said is that, you know, these platforms exist, and it's not a question of the technology isn't out there. It's a question of having a platform that can give us what we want. And B, trying to develop that in a more collaborative fashion, because what we do is invest separately in all of these platforms. The amount of money we have spent in my organization, quite apart from the amount of money that Mike has spent in his, and that's just the UN, is extraordinary. If we had a more collaborative approach to this, then surely that would be the way to progress the use of technology to facilitate decision making, to inform operations, and so on and so forth. So that's just a no-brainer. I think in terms briefly, and it's not perhaps germane to the thread of this conversation, in terms briefly of moving outside the EU and what the union can, or the mechanism can do outside, I think it's both taking all of these lessons that we're discussing, all of the experience that you have, all of the tools that you've developed over years, and exporting them to people who desperately need them. But at the same time, and I can't remember who mentioned it, it was on a call with ASEAN, listening to mental health concerns. I mean, a lot of these people have lessons that we can learn here. You know, every time we go out to Mozambique or Equatorial Guinea or Ecuador or Honduras, we bring back lessons that inform what we do here. And I think that's absolutely critical. It's really important that we don't develop in isolation. There's an entire global community that's trying to do what we're doing, and there's a great deal of innovation out there, and really global leaders in technology, and we can learn from them. So that would be my last 2 cents. Thanks so much for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you very much, Sebastian, and very much in line with getting away from siloed thinking. And if I can just sort of begin to sum up this second hour, obviously the idea is that there is a lot of technology out there. We continue to need new technologies, but we do have a lot of things at our disposal. Obviously, the technologies need to be connected to the necessary knowledge. They need to be needs focused, and we constantly have to be looking back at what the users are giving in terms of feedback, what are meaningful contributions of technology. But obviously many things out there, AR applications, VR applications, mass data mining, satellite technologies, and of course never forgetting that the idea of innovation is not only restricted to the digital realm. So I think it is time to wrap up this discussion. It's been obviously very fruitful, and I think it has been really terrific to get so many views from the responders in this particular arena, to share all of these thoughts with the Commission, obviously taking steps towards how to connect the dots when it comes to the question of technology, important technologies. Where can Europe obviously be increasing its collaborative approach and better anticipating the many crises that we know are still coming at us in the wake of this pandemic. So I would really like at this point to thank all of our participants for taking the time, quite a good chunk of time, to sit here with us this evening, for your valuable insights and ideas. I'm told that 1,250 times at least, that's quite a while back, obviously, that the stream has been opened on YouTube. So there's been great interest in the civil protection community. So thanks very much to our audience for being out there, for contributing some questions. And I think one of the lessons learned with this format is that we have to make it a bit longer if we're going to include a lot of questions from the public. So just for your information, my team in the background has, of course, been taking careful notes, and we do intend to present the results of today's think tank in our 10 years EU Modex anniversary show, which will be airing on the 27th of March. You can note that into your calendars, and I certainly hope that many of you will be able to tune in for that as well. That will be a chance to honor and really elucidate the exercises part of European civil protection that has been referred to by Dr. Arafat and by many of the participants here of our think tank. Before we wrap up, of course, it is time for a closing statement from the Commission, and I'm going to hand over to Hans Das, who has been listening very carefully, of course, also in the background, and hopefully appreciating the insights that he could get from the many operational views here. Hans Das, I'd like to give the floor to you for a closing statement before we wrap up completely.
Thank you so much, Karen, and a very warm thank you to all of the panelists. This has indeed been a fascinating exchange with many good ideas, some new ideas, but always sometimes very useful to just hear these exchanges and how one feeds off the other, sort of. What I take first and foremost from this is that we're living in a world that is changing rapidly in many different respects, and uncertainty is a reality we will have to cope with in the future. The scale of disasters might be changing, the length of disasters might be changing. We have new vulnerabilities, new types of risks that we need to get used to. And so I've just listed a whole series of keywords here that I think have come up in statements time and again about better anticipation, better understanding the future and the disasters of the future, greater adaptability, greater flexibility, more imagination, and perhaps that's one of the more important ones. Avoiding silo approaches, cross-sectoral approaches, resilience-based approaches, capabilities rather than capacities, the importance of exercises, of preparedness, the need to be more courageous, the need to be more bold, and the need, and that's perhaps above everything else more important, the need for more collaborative approaches. What is really good is that all of these suggestions feed into the different strands of work that we have at European level. They will certainly be extremely valuable for the development of the knowledge network that Ilka and his colleagues are working on. And I think this is obviously one of the big priorities we need to take forward. They're equally relevant for some of the work we're doing on the emergency response side, and certainly for the ERCC, the Emergency Response Coordination Center, there's lots of scope to further develop these issues. And the same applies for rescue, where during the technological discussion, and thank you so much, Dr. Ryan, for the suggestions that you made there. I was really thinking sort of, there must be ways to bring some of that new technology into the rescue safety net also. So we need to really think about these things, obviously as a process, not just as technology as such, but as part of an integral process. The challenge for all of us now is to not just leave it at this discussion, but to continue the dialogue within whatever formats. My colleagues know that within our own house, I'm trying to encourage very much an open dialogue on all these sort of challenges for the future. But we need to do it throughout the Union Civil Protection Mechanism. We need to do it with all of our member states, with our partners, with the international organizations. And I really hope that today's think tank was a good start for a continued exchange on these challenges and possible solutions. Thank you so much to all of you. Over to you, Karen.
Thank you very much, Hans, and thanks again to all of our speakers for being here. And I certainly hope that all of this was valuable input for each of you individually that can be built upon going forward. Obviously, as Hans says, the challenges never cease, and disasters, the scale of disasters may be increasing, but we've made some good steps here today, and I think that exactly was the crux of this first EU Civil Protection think tank, was to bring these different worlds together, as Sean Hogan said. So thanks very much to Hans and to Ilka for lending your ears to the discussion. Greater imagination, perhaps a bit more daring, obviously keeping up our resilience and stamina, and looking towards collaborative approaches, which means breaking down some walls and avoiding that silo thinking. I would like to ask our viewers out there, our civil protection community, and any other viewers who have tuned in to please take part in our survey, which you will find in the chat function of the YouTube stream. And thanks very much to all of you for tuning in, to all of our speakers, to all of our public out there, I wish you all the best for the continuing challenges that we face in 2021, and hope to see you again to continue this dialogue and many more. Stay safe and good night to all. Thanks for being with us. Bye-bye.